From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to the show. It's Chicago Newsroom, and I'm Ken Davis. We're now 2 weeks and counting for the mayor's race, and there's been a bit of polling out there by now. If any of it's to be believed, Rahm Emanuel is going to pretty much walk away with it, or maybe just kind of squeak by. If in some chance Chuy Garcia wins this thing, it's going to be because a lot of people who weren't noticed by the pollsters, or people who nobody thought would bother to vote, did come out in pretty big numbers. There's still 2 big televised debates. You may have already seen one of them because it's Thursday night tonight, so you might see that before you even watch this show. There's always the chance that these face-to-face matchups are going to sway the electorate. There are, as we know, pretty big undecided numbers still out there. So today, to help us figure all of this out, we've assembled the elites of Chicago political observers. I refer, of course, to Bruce DuMont, the godfather of political commentary in Chicago, beyond the Beltway and lots of other stuff. I'm glad to have you with us, Bruce, once again. Glad to have you back. Jacky Grimshaw, I believe the first time Jacky Grimshaw on the show, right? If I'm not mistaken.
It's the first time here.
I'm really happy to have you here. Jacky Grimshaw works for the Center for Neighborhood Technology, but was an official in the Harold Washington administration, and I think it's fair to say a longtime political observer of the Chicago scene. So we will be welcoming your comments. And Maria de los Angeles Torres back again. And I was telling you, Maria, that a couple of days ago, I sat down and watched our show from 4 years ago when you were a guest, right after Rahm Emanuel had won. And you said?
That we weren't going to like his autocratic and elitist style.
You did say that. You said that right at this table, yeah. And of course, whether people like it enough to vote for him again is what we're about to find out. So we have to talk very fast today because we've got lots and lots and lots to go over. So, Bruce, what do you think? You think Rahm Emanuel's going to take this?
I think he likely will, but I don't think it's going to be by 15 points. I think it will be close. And even the approval that Rahm has, which is like 44% according to some polls, 44% is about what he got in the runoff. It's a long way from 44 to 50%. And I think the likability issue is still going to be important. Turnout always is the key to an election. And the question is, can Chuy Garcia do something to really spark his electorate and spark the turnout? I haven't seen it yet, other than on the night he won or finished second in the primary.
I think everybody points to that. That was his moment when he had a moment and he seized it. And I think a lot of us were saying at that point, wow, if he can just seize a few more of these, he'll be on his way. But I don't know, there's been a kind of a general consensus that he hasn't seized those moments, Maria?
Well, I mean, I think that what we're watching, and I think we need to be careful. We are in the 1%ers, right? And I think we have to be careful because I think in the field it looks very differently. And I think that everywhere he goes, he is charismatic. He connects with people, and I think that we're not going to know who's going to win the election until the day of the election, because I think it will be fought in the field. And if it's fought in the field, I think that Chuy Garcia has a chance.
Well, the South Side Irish Parade was one of those moments, wasn't it? When, there was a huge, what would you call it? A coolness toward the mayor as he's walking by, and then when Chuy comes along.
Now I want to let Jacky, but I want to follow up on that, but I want to get Jacky's take on this first.
Well, no, I think I have to agree with Maria that this election, it really is the ground game. And it's interesting to me, the union fight, the unions that are supporting Garcia versus the unions that are supporting Emanuel. And, you know, the unions that are into giving money versus the union that are into giving troops. And I think that the troop side may be on the Garcia list of supporters rather than the Emanuel supporters, and those are that ground game that Maria was talking about.
It's also because it's going to happen at spring break. There's going to be a lot of people available, and I agree with you. It's easy to write a check, or it's easy to make a robocall. I got one literally right before I went on the air today from Rahm Emanuel, as I get about at least 3 times a week. But it's different than having perhaps thousands of people going into the precincts, knocking on doors. I think that's something that Rahm is not going to have. If Chewy can get to that, then I think it is that energy, and there's always energy that leads up in the 72 hours before a campaign.
Yeah.
But here's the point that I wanted to make, is you referenced the Southside Irish Parade. I spoke to a longtime friend of mine the other day who's from the 19th Ward. He doesn't do anything that Mike Madigan doesn't approve of. He doesn't sneeze until Mike Madigan says
That's okay.
And he shocked me when he told me he was out working the precincts for Chewy Garcia.
Huh.
That
Okay,
is
but
very
why is that a
interesting.
shock? Okay, I mean, I think that what we're watching in Chicago really is globalization. We have, I mean, the full effects. It started in the 80s, it got worse in the 90s, and then it got worse, worse, worse. And so working class communities, white, African American, and Latinos are suffering, and I think they've been left out of the game. So, and Madigan, and by the way, Ed Burke too. Chewy took Ed Burke's ward by what, almost 80%?
Right.
That doesn't happen without somebody.
Right, saying it's okay.
Well,
A wink and a nod, so to
What
speak.
surprised me about it was, not that it doesn't happen, I mean,
Yeah.
ward committeemen have been selling out the incumbents for many, many years. With the exception, it didn't happen with Harold in 1987. But the reality is that in many of those wards where their political leadership is, they're only concerned about their own political future. They know the changing demographics of the city.
Right.
And frankly, in their heart, they would probably just as soon have Rahm Emanuel go down to defeat, because it would be their perception, at least in the speaker's case, that Chewy would need the speaker a lot more than maybe Rahm might need the speaker.
Well, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to call this brain trust together today, because there's a couple of sort of big picture things that I really want to try to put into perspective, and it takes people who've been around for a few years to do this. Rahm Emanuel is a new kind of mayor. Rahm Emanuel is out of that sort of David Axelrod fly it on TV school of politics,
Yes.
where all you got to do is have lots and lots of money and just slaughter people with TV images, and you don't need to have a ground game. I mean, that's grossly oversimplified. But here we see Rahm Emanuel 4 years after. He's been mayor for 4 years. He's had the opportunity to build these alliances, and we see very little in the way of troops on the streets. And one of the things that I'm just stunned by is that he has apparently made the decision not to put out yard signs. I mean, you don't see. I saw somebody tweeting the other day, I'm leading a bus tour of Rahm Emanuel yard signs. It'll be 12 seconds long.
Well, going to Willie Barrel's funeral the other day, it struck me, going down Stony Island, there were just, a Chewy Garcia sign like every 10 feet, and as you say, there was not an Emanuel sign to be seen, and the mayor came to the funeral, and I just wonder how he felt, going down Stony Island, seeing all of these.
But that's a
Garcia
tactic, though,
signs.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
they
Well,
just didn't print signs.
but again, you're right. I think he's following in the David Axelrod. You buy your elections by raising money and leading an air campaign that literally obliterates the opposition. That's
And
what you
direct
have right
mail.
now. And
Oh
direct
my
mail,
gosh.
which can be brutal. But I agree with you. I mean, psychologically, it's always good to see some yard signs out there. But I think the key thing is going to be, can Chewy mobilize that the union support that are going to be knocking on doors in the 72 hours before the election? And he's got to be doing it, obviously. It appears that he's going to do very well in Hispanic communities, but is he going to do well in the African American communities? And are there pockets of even the white community, the ethnic communities, which I just told the story about the 19th Ward? If those things are going on, then I think Rahm Emanuel could be shocked on election night.
I think the other key constituency here, and it's been really interesting, Jackie, I wanted to talk to you about this, is that there's a lot of young people. And, we were very young 30 years ago when we worked for Harold,
yes,
and we did,
Yeah.
and I think that, a lot of our children, are actually working in the campaign. Tony Preckwinkle's child, a lot of the people who were involved in the Harold Washington, it's their
Dick
children.
Mel's child.
Right.
Who's your child working for? Who is Tony's child working for?
For Chewy.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, I mean,
make sure.
young people
I
have
assume
their
that was
own.
the case, but
No, I'm sorry. Yes, no, thank you, Bruce. So I think that, you know, given that it is also spring break, I mean, the other exciting thing about this election is that it has garnered national attention. I think I emailed you the Latino Victory Fund, Eva Longoria's, you know, nice outfit, and Henry Munoz, big supporters of Obama, are supporting Chuy Garcia. So I think that it is seen as, you know, it is the fight in the Democratic Party. You know, what's the next presidential election going to look like? Our city's retaking, in a certain sense, a populist, you know, approach to what are popular problems.
Right.
I mean,
this will also. I mean, depending on obviously what happens, but if Chuy Garcia were to pull off an upset here, it's going to have ramifications, I think, in the 2016 presidential election.
Immediately.
I think it's going to embolden someone to step up and challenge Hillary
some
Clinton.
Woman, some unnamed
maybe not
woman.
maybe maybe not a woman, but somebody.
Yeah.
They're going to see something here that really does transcend you know, the boundaries.
All right. Now, before we get too excited about all this, one of the things that I've kind of observed of this is that, you know, we're in this runoff milieu that we haven't been in before. This is the first time we've seen a mayor, because the law was changed, first time we've seen a mayor be subject to one of these. There's been some discussion about, well, you know, if it were 1984 and Harold Washington beat, let's say, beat Daley, and it was Washington and Jane Byrne, do you think Harold Washington would have won a runoff? I mean, the dynamics are completely different, aren't they?
Well, you know, we did have a runoff. For the first time, you know, a Democratic nominee had to fight for a Republican for election. You know, that was kind of like the first time.
That's it, yeah, with Bernie Epton.
Yeah, with
And
Bernie
it was
Epton.
a fight.
Right.
And it absolutely was a fight.
It was a close race.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's equivalent to
So you're kind
the
of saying
runoff.
that there was a runoff. It was just that it wasn't with Byrne or Daley.
Yeah, it was a partisan
with-
runoff
yeah,
rather
yeah.
than, you
It
know,
was
the
with Bernie Epton.
nonpartisan we have now.
You know, one thing you referenced the situation or the forum last night or Thursday night at Chicago State, and I thought it was a crowd that was, and again I watched it on CAN TV.
So did I.
It was a crowd actually on the internet. It was a crowd that was certainly favorable to Chuy. I mean, even the moderators that wanted everybody to sort of play it cool, they really didn't play it cool. They showed their partisanship. Rahm showed up. Frankly, I do believe that the organizers basically forced Rahm into showing up. I don't believe that he ever acknowledged that he was going to be there. But again, sometimes when you're putting debates together, you do play politics, and I think politics was played, and they forced Rahm to go there, which was a big story yesterday, but he showed up there. He knew that he was going into a hostile audience. And what I liked about what I saw last night, Chuy was giving some political comments, and he was getting his cheers, even though they said don't cheer. What I liked, what I saw about Rahm Emanuel last night, he went into the lion's den and he was aggressive. He didn't take any crap from anybody, including the moderators and the questioners. And I thought he was a guy in charge, on fire last night.
I was observing last night, watching that actually this is probably the best thing that could have happened to Rahm Emanuel, because Rahm Emanuel needs to be in a hostile environment.
Yes.
He thrives in hostile. You know, he's like a desert plant or something, right? He needs to be in a hostile environment.
He reminded and I think the contrast that I saw last night, he reminded, I think, those that watched it with an open mind. This is a guy that is serious, he takes charge, and he's going to get something done. Chuy did not have that same persona. He was saying things that the audience wanted to hear, but again, the comparison I thought was night and day last night.
But can I say something? Okay, really, I keep hearing this, he's going to get something done, okay? He's like a lot stronger than Chuy and this and that and the other. I mean, let's look, you know, I think that the media has really given Rahm a pass on this, all right? In terms of he's a take charge person. Is that necessarily, okay, does that translate into a process-oriented, we're in deep crisis in the city of Chicago. I mean, deep economic crisis. And frankly, as a political scientist, I do think that autocratic forms of decision-making are really less efficient. because you end up making, it's the mixed field, right? You do it in the middle of the night, you don't consult with anybody, you end up with lawsuits, you end up with strikes, you end up, I think Chewy's he's got another style, and I don't think we've appreciated enough the difference in that style.
But Maria, the frustration that I would have is that, and again, I think there are some columnists in the media that are holding Rahm's feet to the fire, not the editorial boards.
Right,
no question about that.
Yeah.
But it seems to be that the principal goal of the challenger has got to be go in there with a machete and literally slice him down, to remind people that yes, he promised 1,000 police officers. He goes, yes, he did this. Yes, he backed down on this. Yes, he backed down on this.
Yes, he planned $250 million in tax increases.
The point is, and if you're so great with all your wizards, then why is the city's bond rating gone down on your watch? If you're so great. And he's got to remind them of that. I think his commercials should be spent a lot more on that than reminding people about the closed schools. The people that are upset about the closed schools, they're already voting for him.
They're already with him. Yeah. So he's preaching to his own choir.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, now last night, for what's being portrayed as the first time, we saw Chuy Garcia say that he favors kind of something similar to the three-legged stool that Emmanuel's been talking about, which I must say is a wobbly stool. It's casinos and an expanded service tax and so forth. But it's interesting that these are the same things that you almost could criticize the mayor on, because they require state legislation that in one case, a state constitutional amendment, for God's sake. So, these are things these are almost wishes more than they are plans. Couldn't that be said about both guys?
Yeah, and the other thing is that we're getting a property tax increase.
Oh, are we?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the city's broke. There's only so much you can do. As you say, these additional taxes are Springfield derived taxes, not local. And there's no way that we'll be able to pay the pension debt that's coming due. There's no way that we're going to be able to pay back all of the debt that we have incurred, debt for operating expenses, right? I mean, borrowing for operating expenses is not a wise thing to do. That's what we discovered when we went in the office after Jane Byrne, is that we had a lot of debt in addition to unpaid bills that we had to try and solve. So, there is no way that you can get it out of increasing the tax on electricity anymore, right?
Cell phones.
Tax on cell phones, tax on junk food, all of those kind of things. You have to have a major source of revenue, and I think property tax is going to be it. The only question is how much. Yeah.
Well, I think it's also, regardless of the politician, regardless of the office, I think it is totally unrealistic for any challenger to really be able to say what they're going to do, because when they're a challenger, they don't have access to everything. And whether it's Barack Obama inheriting what George Bush gave him, or Mayor Emanuel inheriting the mess, the absolute fiscal nightmare of Richard M. Daley. So it's unfair, but it seems to me that the news media, especially the editorial boards, they're demanding from Chuy Garcia far more specificity and far more knowledge of things that you don't know until you step into that fifth floor office.
Here's another one that really kind of frosts me, and it's the whole discussion about TIFs. And for God's sake, we're not going to spend 3 hours talking about TIFs, because
please not.
I doubt that any of us even really understand it. But here's the part that I do understand. When the Reader and others went after Rahm Emanuel and said, we demand to know how much money is in the bank, the number that came up was about $1.7 billion. And then when they said, well, okay, how much of that money could be rebated back for this, I believe the budget office said it was $17 million, that everything had been completely and totally encumbered. Okay, now Mayor Emanuel himself is saying that maybe there could be TIF reform and some of that money could go. That's that's one of his three legs of his stool, for God's sake. Well, how much money was there, is there, and can there be? You say Chuy Garcia doesn't have access to that. Apparently, Rahm Emanuel doesn't have access to it.
Well, nobody wants to be nobody wants to be candid about it. I mean, challengers and certainly incumbents don't want to be, and they don't want to be candid about it either. One point I would like to talk about is, is getting back to obviously the core issue, which is electability. The one thing that Harold Washington had in 1983, if you were African American, 99% of the African American vote was going to be for you, and maybe 95% of the African American leaders were going to be for Harold, or they were going to pay a price because they were behind the parade of what was going on in their constituency. I want to know whether or not the intensity in the Hispanic community, and whether or not there's a significant number of African American leaders and constituents that are going to remember that Harold Washington would not have been elected without the support of the Hispanic community. And I wonder if it's 30 plus years later whether they're going to return the favor or not.
Let me talk about the Latino community, because I think that's a very important
and the
point.
Right.
Well,
So
I mean, right. Yeah, I think that number one, I think we're in a different situation, okay, than we were in 1980. Again, globalization, divided, 1% up here and a lot of people out there. And a lot of people out there are really that rainbow coalition, okay? And I think that the politics, particularly in the Latino community, we now have a professional middle class that was not here the same way that it is today, okay? So that's one. Number two, let's not forget that Chuy Garcia jumps into the race way late. He was not planning to run, okay? And most of the elected officials, Latino elected officials, had already endorsed Rahm Emanuel. I think they can't all of a sudden not endorse him and go endorse Chuy Garcia. They can let their precinct captains go, as many of them have gone. Some of them haven't, jumped up with the megaphones and cheerleading jumps like Luis Gutierrez.
And Susana Mendoza.
Right, and Susana Mendoza, the two cheerleaders. But I think the rest of them, I mean, it was an odd situation. I think that patronage is dead, and that is what fueled a lot of the, sort of vertical machine that we had in all our communities in 1983. That's gone, okay? And I'm not sure that that's a bad thing.
One of the things that came up, at least a couple of questions last night at the Chicago State thing, is the premise of the African American questioner was, okay, we're black, you're Hispanic, what are you going to do to help us? It almost, the question itself pitted Hispanics against blacks. And does that paint Chuy into a corner?
Well, there have been folks out there that have been trying to fuel a black-brown fight, and I think it's an artificial fight because, the situation for African Americans, working class, unemployed. In fact, unemployed is even worse than for the African American young people than it is for Hispanics. So I think that people are creating a false fight in terms of self-interest. So the self-interest of the African American community, I think, and Hispanic community are pretty much the same, in the sense that they are all have-nots for the most part.
Even in the precincts. I mean, in intellectual discussions, I think I would agree with you. But I'm wondering on the street whether there is that willingness to, and by the way, I would also like to get your thought, is what can you tell us about the difference between the Puerto Rican and the Mexicans? Do Puerto Ricans really want the first mayor to be a Mexican?
Okay, you've got two questions in that. Okay, I think number one. Look, there was never a black Latino coalition. Let's be honest about this. There was an alliance, African Americans, and progressive Latinos and progressive whites, and everybody forgets about the progressive whites, okay, and Asian Americans.
So they all lived on the North Shore, at that north side.
Yes. Okay. So I think
now they don't.
Right. Well, they don't. Well, that's why we've seen 49.
They're now old yuppies.
They're now Republicans.
Rahm is going to win the North Side. Okay, we know that. Okay, except 49. There's little circles in there. So I think that this idea of pitting one against the other that's more of an intellectual thing. Okay, that maybe somebody thinks that there was a coalition and there's that. I think that the interest, we are talking about young people that all the polls and all the surveys and studies show are much more tolerant of each other. There has been a huge influence of African American culture on Latino youth, on white youth, and so I think that that base out there thinks about things a little bit differently than what we used to.
Well, how about this? how about this as one of those things that might affect young people disproportionately? The two big stories that happened this week about the Chicago Police Department, the ACLU saying that stop and frisk in Chicago is 4 times higher than it was at the height of New York, and WBEZ's story about the detectives' ranks shrinking 19% under Rahm Emanuel, and that the clearance rate is at best 29%, which is probably the lowest it's been in decades. So those are things that directly affect people.
Public safety system is broken
Right.
in the city. It's broken from the street up and from the police officers down. It's broken. I mean,
Well, that was Chewy's campaign, his commercial in the primary election. It was focused on public safety, and I think public safety is a big issue. And when you know, like when the mayor's son gets attacked on his own block on the north side, that says that we have an issue of enforcement, police enforcement, and safety that is not being addressed in the city.
I think that's the issue that is most if I believe that Chewy will likely come back to public safety as the issue leading up to the campaign. I think I think in my view, he's sort of wasting his money on the educational school closing issue right now. But the emotional one, because we don't know how many people are going to be shot and killed in this city before April 7th.
Yeah.
But I will bet it will lead the 10 o'clock news probably over 50% of the time.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So, well, okay, where does this leave us? I mean, we're
voting early.
Well, that's actually
Not
the thing
often, right?
That's one of the things I wanted to ask you. Actually, is voting early. Voting early is really doing well. We've got 33,528 people in the first 3 days. Does that mean anything to any of you guys?
I think so.
I
think it's good news for Rahm.
It's
I
good
think
news
Rahm's
for Rahm.
voters tend to be early voters because they're busy, they're going out of town, they're vacationing, and there's more of a tradition of them early voting than I think in the minority community.
there could be another version to this,
And
which
that's what-
is, and this is all the ground troops that are out there who are going to be working election
Right.
day
They're
have made
pushing.
sure that they voted early so they can vote. They
you
can,
go.
yeah.
I agree
So we'll
with-
see.
I agree. I think we both
Well,
agree
again,
with
this
that.
is new territory because early voting is a relatively new thing. So I don't know.
Well, no, in the primary, at least I was in my neighborhood that the Garcia folks were pushing early voting. So, you know, I'm not sure if it's totally Rahm. I think it depends maybe where you live, where the activity is, and I think the ground troops are making a big difference. You know, like when we were doing elections, it was absentee voting, right? I mean, we tried to get everybody, you know, if you don't think you're going to be able to get to the polling place, do an absentee ballot. Now you can do early voting, and so it's that same kind of push.
You're a very interesting person because you obviously have known Chewy Garcia from way back in the Harold Washington days, and today at the Center for Neighborhood Technology, you're working on projects like the bus rapid transit on Ashland.
Right.
So you're allied with Mayor Emanuel, and I'm sure you have some good feelings about Mayor Emanuel. It's a complicated thing all the way around. I feel a lot of this myself, that it's easy to sit here and bash Rahm Emanuel, but there are things he's done as mayor that have been really dramatic, and a lot of it has to do with the CTA, which I'm a big supporter
Well,
of.
and talking about tips, you know, we managed to get a lot of tip money for CTA stations. So, I'm in favor of spending tip money.
All right, that's
Well, I think it's the boldness of it. I mean, there's obviously he's been a bold leader. He's made a lot of very tough choices. I think that was the point that he made last night. And the question is, do you want to reward him for that, or do you want to just take bows and not acknowledge that there's some pretty bad things that happened on his watch?
That's
as well.
it. We're out of time. I'm sorry to say.
wow.
Well, what a great conversation. I'm so glad to have had you all here. Bruce DuMont, Jacky Grimshaw, Maria Torres, thank you so much for being here. You have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. You can see us here all the time. Watch us anytime you want at this address. Feast yourself on all of the campaign videos that are available on CAN TV. You can see everything just by going to CAN TV and watching the forums. We'll be back with another show later on, and we'll see you next week also right here on CAN TV. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.